Hello and good morning and welcome to our today's webcast about Azure Local and Windows Server 2025. I would like to welcome all our partners, customers, and of course colleagues from all around the world. And it's a pleasure to talk about this important topic. It's not a deep dive technical session today, so we are not going through all the features of Azure Local and Windows Server and compare them. It's more about a kind of strategic comparison. We would like to have a clear idea about what Azure Local is, what Windows Server 2025 is good for, and the role of Azure Arc. So before we start, let's introduce me and my team. So in my team, we are the Azure Local Incubation Specialists for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. We have Christoph. He's our strategy lead. We have Rafik. He's the one knowing everything about technical things. And I'm Sven. I'm the enablement lead. So I'm doing enablement, readiness, and we cover the whole region. We are working very closely with the hardware vendors that are super relevant for the Azure Local business. We are also collaborating with system integrators who are doing a great job in bringing Azure Local to our customers' infrastructure. And of course, we are collaborating with our internal stakeholders and support them in making our partners and customers successful. So yes, I care about enablement, and that's why I would like to invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, because on LinkedIn we have Azure Local community called the Azure Local Tech Talk. And on this platform, we share news, readiness offerings, and whatever's relevant for our hybrid infrastructure solutions at Microsoft. So please go to Azure Local Tech Talk on LinkedIn, follow us, and you will not miss anything. So as I mentioned already, we are supporting our Microsoft internal colleagues that are covering customers, for example. So I am joining a lot of customer-facing calls. So I have a clear understanding about what our customers want, what they expect from Microsoft, where they need support. And I try to bring all these things on one page to have a clear idea about what we are talking about today. And to be crystal clear, we are talking about on-premises infrastructure. We all know that there are a lot of great offerings for our partners and customers on Azure public cloud. But today, let's focus on on-premises infrastructure. So what are our customers' asks? So of course, we see that a lot of our customers and partners are asking us to be an alternative for VMware, to be an alternative for Citrix. They expect Microsoft to do this kind of job. And to be crystal clear on that topic, VMware and Citrix are not really a competitor of Microsoft. They are partners for multiple of years. So we have our strengths and they have theirs. And together we build great solutions for our customers. But, and this is not the influence of Microsoft, customers want us to step into these segments, to have a better hypervisor available on premises, to have a solution to manage VDI environments, because customers want to have an alternative. So this is what I spend a lot of time on. Another thing is growing IT demand at the edge. So especially in segments like retail, healthcare, manufacturing, we see that customers want more infrastructure to digitalize their local solutions, and they are looking for something, and they wonder if Azure Local could be best for this, or maybe Windows Server. And the reason why they want to have a solution that is driving their digital needs is that they have a shortage in skilled labor. So in IT, there are not enough people to do all the IT stuff. So they are looking for alternatives that are easy to manage, that are scaling, especially in retail, for example. If you have thousands of stores, you are not able to manage every single store on site. You have to do this remotely, absolutely centralized. So that's why our customers are looking for a solution that enables them to cover their whole infrastructure in the cloud, on premises, at the edge with one management console. The other is that a lot of customers are already in Azure. But there are multiple reasons why, in addition to that, they have on-premises infrastructure. But they like Azure and they like services in Azure. They like the way how to manage their infrastructure in Azure. And they would love to have some of the Azure benefits, if not all, in their on-premises as well. And of course, AI is getting more and more relevant. So how can we bring AI, that is a growing market in Azure? A lot of new features are coming every quarter to on-premises. So how can we solve this? Okay, and this is exactly what we are talking about today. What are the solutions from Microsoft? Where does Azure Local fit best? And where is Windows Server 2025 your best choice? And to be crystal clear on one more thing, of course, you can combine these two things. You can have Azure Local as the host operating system and Windows Server in the guest. When I say Windows Server or Azure Local, I'm talking about the situation that you are looking for a host operating system. So Windows Server, including Hyper-V on your host. And on top of that, of course, in your guest VM. So let's start with Hyper-V, because Hyper-V is super relevant. But we have a lot of confusion in the market for multiple years, and I receive very often questions, is it true that Hyper-V is discontinued? And the answer is absolutely no, it is not. So Hyper-V is not dead, it's alive. What we discontinued is Hyper-V as a standalone product. So we have Hyper-V in a lot of products like Windows Client, Windows Server, Azure Local, Xbox, and of course, Azure is running on Hyper-V. So you can see that Hyper-V is absolutely strategic, critical for Microsoft, and we of course will not discontinue Hyper-V. What we discontinued is Hyper-V as a standalone product. So with Windows Server 2019, we had the standalone version of Hyper-V, and that was for free. So customers were able to download Hyper-V and use it without any payment for any Microsoft solution like Windows, Windows Server, and so on. It's a standalone product, and this has been discontinued. It's no longer available as a Hyper-V standalone 2022 or 2025. But of course, Hyper-V is important. And we have different versions of Hyper-V. So for example, the features we had in Windows Server were not the same as we had in Azure Local. There we had much more features. And on Azure, of course, we have most features because Azure is our data center, and everything we need to handle this data center is very often part of Hyper-V. So we are bringing all the technologies there. And some years ago, when we brought Windows Azure Local or the Azure Stack HCI to live, we brought a lot of features from Azure to on-premises with Azure Stack HCI. But now with the situation we are facing, or our customers are facing with VMware and Broadcom, they say that's not enough. We do not need these features only in Azure or Azure Local. By whatever reason, we are not able to use these solutions for our specific scenario. So we need Hyper-V in Windows Server. And that's why we brought so many new features to Windows Server as a host operating system. because some years ago we positioned Azure Local or Azure Stack HCI as the best possible host operating system. So if you're looking for the latest and greatest features on Hyper-V, Storage Spaces Direct, or software-defined network, Azure Local or Azure Stack HCI was your best choice. Windows Server focused on performance to run applications, of course, security and the ability to have a hybrid environment. But Windows Server was meant for the guest and Azure Local for the host. And now we brought all those features to Windows Server 2025 as well, like GPU pooling, GPU partitioning. We brought features to Windows Server in the storage spaces direct segment and in the software-defined network segment as well. So we have more or less a feature parity now on Windows Server and Azure Local. And this is what our customers liked very much, because now they have the opportunity to use Windows Server for the host with more or less all the features that are needed. But there's one question popping up now. So what are the differences between Windows Server and Azure Local? And this is what we're talking about today. So understand the difference and understand the benefits of Azure Arc. So what is Azure Arc and what it is good for? So let's go back some months at Microsoft Ignite. At Microsoft Ignite, we announced that Azure Stack HCI will now be Azure Local. So if you have not heard about Azure Local so far, but you heard about Azure Stack HCI, now you know Azure Stack HCI is not Azure Local. It's part of the Azure Local family, because Azure Local is more than only Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI is our HCI solution we have for multiple of years. But with Azure Local, we bring a broad range of solutions under the umbrella of Azure Local, and Azure Stack HCI is one of these solutions. So for example, we announced the low-spec, low-cost edge servers. This is in preview right now. We announced disconnected scenarios and maybe more to come. So when we are talking about Azure Local today, we are mainly talking about Azure Stack HCI. We're not talking about the disconnected, and we will talk a little bit about the low spec, low cost later. So at Ignite, we announced Azure Local. And you can see in the announcements one pager, there is Azure Arc included. So Azure Arc seems to be relevant for Azure Local. And when we announced Windows Server 2025, you can see on the start page of the presentation, Azure Arc is included as well. So it looks like that Azure Arc is something that's relevant for Azure Local and Windows Server. But what is Azure Arc? So when I do trainings to partners or customers and I ask them, are you aware of Azure Arc? Do you know what it is, what it is good for? Unfortunately, only 3, maximum 5% of the hands are going up. So Azure Arc is a solution that is super powerful and is exactly what our customers need if they want a hybrid infrastructure. But unfortunately, most of our partners and customers do not know it. So I'm happy to share Azure Arc insights today as well. So Azure Arc is basically for free. It's a free solution you can use to make your Windows Server infrastructure, your Linux infrastructure, your databases, your containerized infrastructure more hybrid. It's a small agent you install, for example, in your Windows Server virtual instance. And now you have the power of the Azure cloud in combination with your non-Azure infrastructure. Because Azure Arc is a connector between everything that is outside of Azure with the Azure control plane. And there are 2 directions. So one direction is to bring everything that is outside of Azure to the Azure control plane. Of course, your data stays on premises. No data or any information that is critical will leave your data center and be copied to Azure. That's not the case. What is the case is that you can see all the infrastructure you have outside of Azure that is Arc enabled in your Azure control plane. And now you are able to monitor, secure your infrastructure from one control plane, and everything is combined in one pane of glass. And this makes it so powerful because now you are able to tag everything you have to use role-based access control you are used to do in Azure. Now you can do this for your whole infrastructure outside of Azure as well. But there's a second part in Azure Arc, and this is the Azure Arc enabled services. So there are some services in Azure our customers like to have on premises as well. And through the connection of Azure Arc, you are able to use Azure services outside of Azure on your Windows Server, Linux, and so on infrastructure. So not every feature is available in any infrastructure, but let's have a look on what you can do with the Windows Server outside of Azure if it's Arc connected. So you can see a list on the left side of features that are Azure features. Control features, performance, monitoring, management, and so on. And you can see three pillars. So the left one is the Windows Server outside of Azure that is not Arc enabled. Of course, there are no Azure features you can use on this non-Arc enabled infrastructure because it's not connected. But if you connect it through Azure Arc, and this basic connection is absolutely for free, all you need is an Azure tenant, and the Azure tenant itself is for free as well. As long as you do not need consume any paid services, you will not get invoiced. So if you do the connection between Windows Server and Azure Arc, you have some of the features included absolutely for free, like role-based access control usage for your infrastructure outside of Azure. And now you opened the door to Azure, and now you are able to use Azure services in your non-Azure infrastructure as well, like the Azure Update Manager. So if you are interested in managing your Windows Server instances in and outside of Azure through the Azure console, that's super easy, but you have to pay for it. It's $5 per virtual machine per month. What you also can do is you can do hot patching. You can do Windows Server Defender for Cloud. You can do extended security updates. So if you have some non-supported Windows Server or SQL instances in your non-Azure environment, well, Azure Arc gives you the opportunity to receive extended security updates. That's not for free, but you are able to use it through Azure Arc. Another option is the hot patching. So when we announced Windows Server 2025, we said hot patching is coming to our Windows Server customers outside of Azure. But this is not included in the operating system Windows Server 2025. This is a service you can use together with Windows Server 2025 as an Arc-enabled service, and you have to pay for that. And at Ignite, we announced something new for our customers with Windows Server plus software assurance. This is the right column. You can see that there are a lot of green points. These are all for free if you have a Windows Server license plus software assurance. So that's good news for our customers to test Azure Arc. If you have Windows Server license, if you have software assurance, everything on the right side is included in your license. So test it now and your infrastructure will be much, much more hybrid. And if we have a look now at Azure Local, we can say that the right column is what you get with Azure Local, because Azure Local includes all these services and more, like hot patching. Hot patching is something you have to pay for outside of Azure, no matter if you have a software assurance or not. But in Azure Local, it's included. You do not have to pay for it in addition to what you have to pay for Azure Local. Extended security updates are for free on Azure Local. They are for free on Azure as well. You have to pay for every infrastructure outside of Azure and Azure Local. The reason why Azure Local brings you additional benefits is that Azure Local is a kind of Azure, but outside of Azure. So it's like an Azure dedicated host in your on-premises. And if you have features in Azure that are included, that are for free, like extended security updates, like the Azure Update Manager, or hot patching, it's included and for free on Azure Local as well, because it's kind of extension of Azure to your on-premises. So in this one pager, you can see a rough comparison between Windows Server and Azure Local. So Windows Server on the left side, Azure Local on the right side. So Azure Local is connected to Azure by default. So you have to do that. It's mandatory. Azure Arc is absolutely a must for Azure Local. If you're not able or willing to connect your infrastructure to the Azure portal, if you're not able to do that, Azure Local is not your solution at the moment, because Azure Arc is mandatory. On the left side, Windows Server, Azure Arc is an option for you. If you want to run it completely disconnected, no problem. If you want the benefits of Azure Arc, you can do that. But you can see that the Arc box on the left side and in the middle is different. So on the left side, you can see the blue one that is including the guest operating system and the containers. So you can see that you are able to manage through Azure Arc, through the Azure console, the guest operating system and your containers. But you're not able to go to the host operating system. To do this, you need System Center Virtual Machine Manager, because there are 3 solutions that enables you to manage your host operating system through Azure and Azure Arc as well. This is Azure Local, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, and vCenter. So if you have one of these solutions, you are able to use your Azure console to go down to the host operating system, to deploy new virtual machines, for example, and to see everything that is related to your host operating system. On the right side, Azure Local, you can see that Azure Arc has a kind of flat rate. Most of the services are included, and maybe someday you can go down to the hardware. So the idea of Azure Local is to have a solution you can manage completely through the Azure cloud, from the application to the virtual infrastructure to the host operating system, and do a lot of things with the hardware as well. And this is why hardware on Azure Local is more critical than on Windows Server. So of course, on Windows Server, you need a certified hardware as well. But it's not so complicated to get this certification. So there's a really broad availability of solutions in the market. For Azure Local, you need a more specialized certification. And this is because Azure Local and our hardware vendors collaborate very close, that hardware and the host operating system, Azure Local, fit together perfectly. And one of the reasons is because Azure Local gets, at the moment, quarterly updates. So you get new features every quarter. Of course, you get security updates on Windows Server and Azure Local monthly, but new features on a quarterly basis with Azure Local. And to guarantee that everything is running smoothly when you do the upgrades, the collaboration with the hardware vendors is absolutely critical. And that's why we need a much higher level of certification on Azure Local. And this is one of the benefits you see with Azure Local, that you get new features earlier. So if you are looking for a solution that is more or less the same for the next 5 or 10 years, It's not Azure Local, because this is a solution that gets changes every quarter, every half year, every year, new things. It's a benefit for all those who want to have new technology very fast. But if you are looking for a solution you do not have to touch, that's more or less the same for multiple of years, it's Windows Server. If you want to be disconnected, Windows Server. Azure is absolutely, Azure Local is a connected solution. So you can see here are some differences. Another difference is that with Windows Server, you are completely responsible for everything you are doing, because Windows Server is extremely flexible. So you have um, yeah, hundreds of things you can do with Windows Server. You can customize it. Azure Local is a standardized solution. So if you want to have a solution that is absolutely optimized on your infrastructure and you want to make all the decisions by yourself, Windows Server is your better choice. If you want a solution that is scalable, where you want to have a guarantee that in your 100 or 2000 of sites, the solution is looking the same, because you are not able to do this individual things, then go with Azure Local. Because when you're scaling, when you have hundreds and thousands of nodes, it's absolutely critical that all your updates are running smoothly, and you only can do this if your infrastructure is standardized. Another benefit of Azure Local is that you have unique features. So for example, Azure Virtual Desktop, including Windows multi-session. This is something you only get on Azure and on Azure Local. So Windows multi-session is the only Windows in the market where multiple people can access the virtual instance at the same time. And this is only available in Azure, and we brought it to Azure Local 1 year ago. So if you're looking for something like this, it's only Azure Local. This is one of the benefits you get with Azure Local. So in a nutshell, Windows Server and Azure Local are both great products. Windows Server gives you more flexibility, for example, to attach external storage. If you want to have a standardized solution that is easier to deploy, easier to monitor, to manage, and to update, go with Azure Local. If you want a solution that stays the same for multiple of years, it's Windows Server. If you want a solution that gets new features, and you need these new features because it's absolutely critical for you that you get the latest and greatest, for example, around AI and machine learning, it's it's Azure Local. Both solutions have Hyper-V included. Both solutions can run guest operating systems with Linux, Windows Server. So if you have the need to run a Windows Server instance, there are no limitations on Azure Local. It's absolutely the same. Everything is running on top of Hyper-V. You can run containers in both scenarios. AKS, no problem. Both scenarios, no differences. But on Azure Local, a lot of things are standardized. They are included in the Azure console control plane. So when you are using Azure Local, a lot of things have a graphical user interface. If you're going with Windows Server, well, you have some tools like Hyper-V Manager, but these tools are, well, they are not very brand new. So we have solutions like Windows Admin Center on top of Windows Server to manage your Windows Server. Of course, we have System Center Virtual Machine Manager to do this, but these are additional tools. And for System Center, for example, you have to pay. If you go with Azure Local, everything is included in the Azure portal. And this is the idea of Azure Local, that you do not have to be familiar with a second or third tool to manage your infrastructure, that you can do everything with the Azure portal that you are already familiar with. So let's come back to Azure Local and what Azure Local is mainly meant for. It's distributed infrastructure, the so-called edge. Retail with thousands of stores, manufacturing worldwide, managed through the headquarter. You get access to all your worldwide sites. And healthcare, for example, is something that's super relevant. There's a lot of digitalization in the healthcare, and some ISVs, for example, have solutions for healthcare. And the customers expect from the ISV not only to provide the software solution, but also the hardware, the underlying hardware, if the customer is not able to use it as a service through the public cloud Azure, for example. So ISVs are looking for a hardware they can sell to the customer together with their software solution. And the customer very often wants the ISV not only to manage the software, but also the underlying hardware. And with Azure Local, they have a very good solution because they have thousands of customers. Everything is standardized, and they are able to manage the underlying hardware from one console. And this is the power of Azure Local. But we know that a lot of customers are looking for an alternative for their data center, not for their edge. Azure Local is not really meant for the data center, but a lot of customers are using it. So it's absolutely allowed. You can do that. But our focus is on the edge. It's on standardized solutions and on scaling. So let's have a look at what Azure Local is about and how it looks like. So for example, if you want to deploy distributed infrastructure, you have a different situation compared to deploying an infrastructure in your headquarters IT, because in your headquarters IT, it's super simple. You have a lot of resources, expertise, you have access to your data center. That's easier. But if you have distributed infrastructure, so hundreds or thousands of sites, you do not have IT experts on site. So deploying infrastructure in the edge is absolutely something you have to solve. Who's doing that? How can you do that without the need to have expertise on site? And this is where Azure Local comes in. So Azure Local deployment in the edge is simple. So you unpack the box, you connect the box to the Azure cloud, and then you are able to pick this connected nodes from the Azure portal, from the headquarter, and create an Azure Local cluster. So this is super simplified, but this is how it should work. And when you have done all the things in a correct way and everything works, you can do paste and copy. Then you can scale. You can say, okay, it worked in store 1. Now do the same in store 2, 3, 4, and so on. This is the idea of Azure Local. To standardize, to make it easier to deploy, and to scale. And of course, it's not only the deployment, it's also the updates. So you have your Azure infrastructure, you have your data center infrastructure, you have infrastructure in the multi-cloud, in the edge. No matter where it is, you want to use one tool to have a clear idea about how the status of your instances is. And this is Azure Update Manager. And if you're already familiar with Azure Update Manager because you're an Azure customer, it's easy for you to include your non-Azure infrastructure through Azure Arc into the Azure portal. And now you can see everything and you can manage and update your infrastructure outside of Azure the same way you have done this in the past with your Azure instances. Yeah, and central visibility, we already talked about that, is absolutely critical for our customers, and you get it with Azure Arc, and you, of course, have the best of it with Azure Local. So let's talk about hardware. I already said that hardware is important because Azure Local is a solution that gets regular updates. It's absolutely critical that you have updates on your hardware as well. So firmware updates and other things. So that's why you need special certified hardware for your Azure Local. In most of the cases, you cannot use existing hardware and update to Azure Local. You can check if your hardware is still eligible to run Azure Local on top of it. If you go to the link you can see here, the Azure Local catalog, you can see all the certified hardware for Azure Local. And if you are not 100% sure, please connect your hardware vendor and they will help you. So in this Azure Local Catalog, you can see all the Azure Stack HCI, the HCI solutions that are now called Azure Local. But new things are coming. For example, the low-spec, low-cost edge servers. And this is something that's super powerful, especially at the edge, because the Azure Stack HCI solutions are, well, they are servers and they are not really cheap. So we have a broad range of hardware solutions from entry to high end. But especially in the edge, sometimes you need lower specs, lower cost. So hardware requirements has to be lowered from the operating system perspective. And this is what the left side of this one pager is about. This is in a preview right now and will be available very soon. And I recommend to watch this video. So if you go on YouTube and type in Azure Local with low-cost hardware, you can see this 9-minute video where Cosmos Darwin explained how the new solution in the Azure Local portfolio will look like, how deployment in the Azure Local portfolio will be in near future. Super simple, as I told you before. So in this video, you can see that there's an unpacked box. So it could be a single node, could be dual node. In this scenario, it's a dual node. There will be a broad range of solutions from multiple OEMs. And in this scenario, he connected these two nodes with his network. Super simple. You do not have to have very high IT skills to do that. And that's important for the edge because usually you do not have these skills on site. The second thing is that he puts in a prepared USB stick and boots from this USB stick. So now this server automatically connects to the Azure tenant. And then he's booting the second device the same time. Super simple, more or less anyone with limited IT skills can do that. The next thing is that in the IT headquarters, you go to your Azure portal, you go to the Azure Arc section, and then you can see that there are new sites available, new hardware connected. So first, you do the provisioning. So you prepare your site, you prepare your machines, and then you complete the on-site setup. And then you are ready for deployment. Now you can pick 2, 3, 4 nodes and say, I want to create an Azure Local cluster. You have to answer some questions, but the rest, the deployment, will be done absolutely standardized and automatically. So that includes the host operating system, that includes security standards. And of course, you can deploy through the Azure portal, Azure Kubernetes services as well. And something else is new. You are able to use Active Directory, of course, but if you do not want to do that, if you do not have Active Directory, you are able to use the Azure Key Vault feature. So you have a lot of new options to deploy Azure Local in your edge scenarios. Yeah, a lot of things coming to Windows Server, a lot of things coming to Azure Local, a lot of things are already there. Two great solutions. They have a lot of things in common, but some differences, especially Azure Local has more features and will have more features in the near future because it gets regular updates. And if you're still undecided, if Windows Server is best for your host operating system or Azure Local, I can give you one more argument. Because if you want to use Azure Kubernetes services on top of Windows Server or Azure Local, you can do it in both scenarios. But in Azure Local, it's included. And included means without additional cost. So that's good news for all our customers who want to use Azure Kubernetes services. Azure Local brings these services without additional cost. And in some minutes, we will talk about cost as well, because I have some slides for Azure Local licensing with me today as well. And if you are a VMware customer, I have good news for you as well, because Microsoft supports you migrating your VMware infrastructure to Azure Local. And you are using the Azure Migrate tool. So the tool you're usually using to migrate your VMware instances to Azure. This tool you can use to migrate VMware to Azure Local as well. So this tool has done or has got some improvements to be able to use it on premises to on premises. So it's more or less the same tool. You are using the Azure portal to prepare and execute the migration, but it's an on-prem to on-prem migration. So the data will not be routed through Azure. You're only using this Azure service. Yeah, that's it. That's the comparison between Windows Server 2025 and Azure Local. Two great options, one more flexible, the other standardized, one for individual needs, the other for scaling needs. And Azure Local brings a lot of additional benefits and a lot of things that are included in the operating system, and some are unique, like Azure Virtual Desktop. Windows Server 2025 is extremely powerful because you have hundreds of new features and functionalities compared to Windows Server 2022. So if you have an old version of Windows Server in your host or guest operating system, I recommend to upgrade to Windows Server 2025, for example, because you are able to use hot patching as an Arc-enabled service, and hot patching gives you the opportunity to do your security patches, your monthly security patches, without the need for a reboot. Yeah. So now let's have a look on licensing, and then a little bit later, if you have questions in the FAQ, we will have in the Q&A section, we will have a look at these as well. Okay, how to license Azure Local and Windows Server as a guest operating system. So Azure Local for the host and Windows Server for the guest. It's on premises, and Azure Local is kind of Azure dedicated host, but not on Azure, but in your own data center. And this is relevant to understand the licensing of Azure Local. So Azure Local is on premises, but you must not handle Azure Local as a normal on-premises infrastructure, especially when it comes to licensing the guest operating system. And we will see that there are 3 or 4 options to license your Azure Local plus Windows Server. And one is the pay-as-you-go version. So pay-as-you-go for the host and pay-as-you-go for the guest. This version is the best for all those who want to be super flexible, who do not want to pay in advance, who are not really sure for how long they need the solution, and they want to turn it on and off whenever they want to. So explaining Azure Local pay-as-you-go is super simple, because the cost for Azure Local is $10 per active core per month. Active means if you deactivate some of your cores because you have seasonality in your business, Azure Local only wants you to pay the active cores. And it's only the $10 for the host operating system. No hidden cost like amount of storage or data transfer. Nothing comes on top of that. It's $10. And it's an Azure consumed revenue. So if you have any Azure rebates, because you have a large contract, this is eligible for Azure Local as well. So you can have these rebates on Azure Local. Azure Local comes with a free trial of 60 days, so that's super interesting if you want to do a kind of testing. And Azure Kubernetes services are included in the fees. And a lot of Azure Arc enabled services are included as well, like extended security updates, no additional cost for Windows Server 2012 and SQL Server 2012 and Release 2. Azure Update Manager is included, and hot patching and other benefits. And then you have the option to license your guest operating system on top of Azure Local as well through pay-as-you-go. For all those who know the Azure portal, it's super simple. You connect to Azure Arc, you connect to your Azure Local cluster, you go to the configuration, and then you will see the Windows Server subscription add-on option, and there's a purchase button. And if you press that purchase button, you get the information, how many nodes you have, and how many cores you have on these nodes, and how much the cost is if you activate it. It's around about 23 something dollars, and then you get an unlimited Windows Server virtual machine guest use right as a pay-as-you-go option through the Azure portal. So you are consuming Windows Server through Azure. So absolutely the same as you would create a virtual machine in Azure and license this virtual machine through the Azure portal. It's absolutely the same. So you have Windows Server from Azure. Another option to license Azure Local and Windows Server is Azure Hybrid Benefit for Azure Local. It's important to understand to differentiate the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server and for Azure Local, because the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Azure Local is only something customers with an enterprise agreement or CSP subscription get. So you have to have a Windows Server data center license. This is one of the requirements. It's not for Windows Server Standard, only for data center. And you need a software insurance included, but only through enterprise agreement. So open value, for example, not eligible. And you need a CSP subscription for Windows Server Data Center. If you purchase Windows Server Data Center through CSP, it's not eligible. It has to be a CSP subscription. And then you can use the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Azure Local. So what does this mean? You go again to the Azure portal, you connect through your to your Azure Local cluster, you go to the configuration as you have done before with the Windows Server subscription add-on. And here you can see on that one slider the purchase button on Windows Server subscription add-on, and you can see the Azure Hybrid Benefit activate button. So it's the red one on the top. If you activate this Azure Hybrid Benefit because you have enterprise agreement, Windows Server Data Center or Windows Server Data Center CSP subscription, then you can activate this button, and then you will get Azure Local without additional cost. So you do not have to pay the $10. This is now included without additional cost. But you are losing the right to use your Windows Server Data Center for the guest operating system. You exchanged it to your Azure Local usage without additional cost. But at the same time, you get the right to use Windows Server in the guest operating system back. Because when you activated the Azure Hybrid Benefit for Azure Local, you can see it here, it's activated, it's green. Now you can see the Windows Server subscription add-on section has no longer a purchase button, it has an activate benefit button. So now you can activate the Windows Server subscription add-on without additional cost. So you get back the option to use unlimited Windows Server in your Azure Local cluster as well. So with Azure Hybrid Benefit for Azure Local, You get Azure Local without additional cost. You get Windows Server subscription add-on to run Windows Server in your guest operating system without additional cost.
Sven, there is a, a question on
Yep.
licensing. Is can Azure Hybrid benefits apply to Windows Server and software assurance license through MPSA or Select Plus?
It's only available through enterprise agreement. So any type of enterprise agreement is eligible for that, or a CSP subscription. Other channels that are not enterprise agreement is not eligible. So like Open Value and some of those you mentioned, Christoph. Thank you for the question.
Thanks.
But if you have software assurance from another channel, you have some benefits as well. And this is the third section. It's a mix of pay-as-you-go and Azure Hybrid benefit for Windows Server. So in this scenario, you pay the $10 for your physical core that is active. And then you get all the benefits of Azure Local. And on top of that, you can use Windows Server in your guest operating system. Because as I said at the beginning of the licensing section, Azure Local is like an Azure dedicated host. And to license an Azure dedicated host, you have two options. So one is through the Azure portal by activating the Windows licensing, or the other is to bring your own license, your own on-premises perpetual licenses, for example, or subscriptions from any channel. And if you have, for example, an OEM Windows Server data center license plus a software assurance through the Open Value license channel, you can combine them. Now you have data center plus software assurance, and you can bring your own license to Azure Local. You are not able to activate it in the Azure portal. So please do not activate the Windows Server subscription add-on because there is only a purchase button, no activate benefit button. So this is classic bring your own licensing use. So you have to document that you have the license. And if you have an audit, you can say, here I have the license, here I have Azure Local, I'm allowed to use this license on Azure Local. It's not documented in the Azure portal. And this is possible in the guest for Windows Server Data Center. So now you can license the whole Azure dedicated host, so-called Azure Local, and then you can run unlimited virtual machines. Or another option is to use Standard Edition for this scenario. So you need Standard plus software assurance, but you are not able to license the physical host. With Standard, you are only allowed to license the guest operating system. So the same way as you would do it on Azure. So if you would have a single VM, let's say with 8 virtual cores, you can license these through 8 virtual or 8 core standard edition plus software assurance, and then you can bring this license to Azure. And this is the same procedure as with Azure Local. And there is a last option, and I like this very much because this is an Azure Local OEM prepaid license. So this prepaid license is very similar to what you know with Windows Client already. So when you purchase a Windows PC from a hardware vendor, very often the license is included. It's pre-installed in the BIOS. So you start your PC for the first time and you do not have to register anything because it's pre-licensed, pre-registered, everything is included. And this option we have for Azure Local as well. But this is nothing you can purchase after you purchase the hardware. So you have to do it at the same time because the license is included in the BIOS. So if you need this kind of licensing, please make sure that you order the prepaid license together with your hardware. And I see a lot of benefits with this license. So for example, think about a customer with a huge data center. They have an enterprise agreement for this data center. They covered all the costs of their data center. And now they want to extend their IT to the edge. Let's say retail, let's say 2,000 stores. So now they bring 2,000, 4,000 single nodes to these stores. They are using the new easy deployment. Or maybe you are the ISV with the healthcare solution, and you want to bring the hardware with the solution to your customers or to your sites in the case of the retailer. You do not want to have an enterprise agreement for that, because now you have to do a lot of manual things. You have to say, okay, I have an enterprise agreement with 10,000 cores. And now you have to document manually how many physical cores you have on site. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. You have to care about the lifetime of the hardware. You have to care about the lifetime of the enterprise agreement. This is a lot of manual work you have to do. The prepaid license is licensing Azure Local and the guest operating system, including Azure Kubernetes Service, for the lifetime of the hardware. So the customer does not have to care about the licensing on top of this edge solutions. This makes it so powerful because it's so easy. And you deploy Azure Local the easy way I demoed in the screenshot some minutes ago. And when you connect automatically to your Azure portal, the licensing will be automatically enabled as well. So you do not have to do anything. No pressing buttons or things like that. Azure Local is automatically enabled in the Azure portal. The Windows Server subscription to run virtual machines is included and automated or activated automatically as well. Super simple. Couldn't be simpler. So please ask your hardware vendor, please ask your distributor or wherever you buy your solution about the Azure Local OEM prepaid license. And well, that's it for today. So now we are at the end of our presentation, and now we have a lot of time to talk about the open questions.